Ilahi ta'ala, correct your intentions. The author says, section 19, the conditions of following the Imam in prayer. Now we want to talk about praying in Jama'ah. That's broader than praying Jumu'ah. We talked about Jumu'ah. The Jumu'ah prayer is exclusively a Jama'ah prayer. And there are some other prayers that are exclusively Jama'ah prayers, or some other cases when prayer is exclusively done in Jama'ah. So, but now we're going to talk about Jama'ah in general. And the author says, it is an obligation on the follower in the prayer, whether Jumu'ah or otherwise, to observe 7 matters. The first matter is for the follower not to precede the Imam in the standing position, meaning the place where one is standing. That means his heels cannot be in front of the Imam's heels. However, if someone stands abreast of the Imam, that means lined up with the Imam, heels are at the same level, his prayer is not nullified, although it is disliked to do so. What would be invalid is for the follower to stand, to have his heels ahead of the Imam's heels, or for his buttocks in the sitting position to be ahead of the Imam's buttocks. So it's not by toes, it's not by knees. It is also a requirement for the follower to say the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, after the Imam. Therefore, the follower must withhold from saying the opening Allahu Akbar until the Imam completes his Allahu Akbar, meaning the Ra, the R sound, and Akbar. The Imam has to complete that. Then the follower can start his with the intention. In fact, simultaneity with the Imam in the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, invalidates the follower's prayer. So being lined up with the Imam, their heels on the same line, this will not invalidate the follower's prayer, but saying Allahu Akbar with the Imam, this will make the follower's prayer not initiate. This says invalidates. This invalidates the follower's prayer. Maybe it says in the Arabic, La yanaqid. That means I don't remember. I did memorize Mukhtasar, but I need to review it. So if it says La yanaqid, that means doesn't even initiate, as opposed to invalidating. Invalidate implies that it was valid. I.e., the follower's prayer is not considered to have started. There it is right there. So it's not even initiated, not that it's invalidated. However, simultaneity with the Imam and other than the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, simultaneity with the Imam and other than the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, i.e., in the physical integrals, simultaneity in the physical integrals is disliked, and the congregational merit of the prayer is lost, with the exception of saying amin after reciting Al-Fatiha, though amin is not even an integral. Amin is a sunnah. What does that footnote say? To say amin after completing the recitation of Al-Fatiha is recommended, yes, not an integral. After reciting Al-Fatiha, it is sunnah for the follower to say amin simultaneously with the Imam. Although this does not invalidate the follower's prayer, they are prohibited from outpacing the Imam by one complete physical integral. I like that. Outpacing him, that means going ahead of him. Such as if the follower bowed, then stood upright before the Imam bowed. Here. Now, to understand this part here, you need to understand how to count the integrals. It does not invalidate the follower's prayer to outpace the Imam by one complete physical integral. Such as if the follower bowed, so he bent over. So if he bent over and he didn't stand back up yet, this is not a complete integral. And then he stood upright before the Imam bowed. So by standing upright, he completed the integral of bowing, but he did not complete the integral of standing. It's not by getting into the integral that you completed it. It's by going out of the integral after getting into it that you completed it. One's prayer is invalidated if he outpaces or lags behind the Imam by 2 consecutive long physical integrals, or 1 long and 1 short physical integral without a valid excuse. So, one's prayer is invalidated if he outpaces the Imam or lags behind the Imam by 2 consecutive long physical integrals. Long physical integrals are bowing and prostrating. The short physical integrals are standing back up and sitting up between the 2 prostrations. The long integrals are bowing and prostrating. That means you can stay there as long as you want. The short integrals are standing back up and sitting up between the 2 prostrations. According to a saying, which is this saying that they are short, according to saying that those are short, then you just stay there as long as it takes to say whatever was narrated from the Prophet in that spot. And then you move on. Now, according to another saying, which our Shaykh says is the stronger saying, actually, he said, is going out of the integral considered after completing the integral completely or while starting to leave it. If he goes out of the integral, he's not in it anymore, so he completed it. Now, the Shaykh, according to him, the strong saying is actually that those are all long integrals. But there's some benefits in regarding the saying that some are long and some are short. One of them is this case here, learning about this rule here. We go by saying that sitting between the 2 sujuds and rising up from bowing are short, then this matters for what we are reading. So he says, one's prayer is invalidated if he outpaces or lags behind the Imam by 2 consecutive long physical integrals, or 1 long and 1 short physical integral without a valid excuse. An example of outpacing the Imam is if the follower bowed, then he stood upright, and then began descending. See right there. Then he began descending. That means he came out of it. He finished it. To prostration, while the Imam is still standing. So he bowed, and then he stood upright. So he completed a bow. And he started standing. And then he began descending. That means he completed the standing. So that's 1 long and 1 short, if we count it as short. He stood upright and then he began descending to prostration while the Imam is still standing. And an example of lagging behind the Imam is if the Imam ascended from bowing and he stood upright and began descending to prostration while the follower is still standing. In both scenarios, the follower's prayer is nullified. The Imam's prayer doesn't depend on the follower. The follower's prayer depends on the Imam. You said, for example, coming out of ruku', is it after the person stands up, the integral is completed, or while starting to rise back up? So now I just answered your question. Is your question answered for you? Inshallah, it's answered for you. So let me say, make sure, this is a good advice that we learned from our sheikhs. Don't dwell on the question so that it makes you not pay attention to the lesson. Maybe you paid very well attention, but I just want to say this because now I just underlined it and I repeated and I emphasized. Then he began descending. That means he got out of the position. So maybe he didn't catch it. If you didn't catch it, though I emphasized it and underlined it right there, maybe it was not clear on my part. But maybe it's because you're thinking of a question while I'm saying something. So you have to be mindful there. So you said, for example, coming out of ruku', is it after the person stands up that the interval is completed? Is when he comes out of the ruku'. When he comes out. He's not in ruku' anymore. When he's not in ruku' anymore, what's ruku'? Ruku' is to bend over until your palms can reach your knees. That's ruku'. Or if a person bends over but his knees are bent a lot, is that ruku'? That's not ruku'. So resort back to your definitions too. So ruku' is known. What is ruku'? So when he gets out of that, when he's not in a position that's called ruku', it means he's not in ruku'. When he's not in a position that's called standing upright, then he's not standing upright. When he's not in a position that's called making sujood, then he's not in sujood. Also remember, what did we say? You have to do what the thing is called. What do you call sitting? Sitting is when your buttocks lands, your rear end lands. That's sitting. What do you call bowing? Bowing is when you bend over until your palms can reach your knees without your knees being bent a lot. What do you call sujood? Etc., etc., etc. It's clear for you, inshallah? Brother Uthman, is clear for you? So what if I'm not sure if the Shaykh is in ruku' or started to rise? Wait, is what I said clear to you? That's a different question. Okay. You said, what if I'm not sure if the Shaykh is in ruku' or started to rise? Then you're going to see. One of the conditions of following the Imam is to know his moves. Now, the author says, lagging behind the Imam by more than 3 long physical integrals, like bowing and the 2 prostrations, invalidates the follower's prayer. Even if he had an excuse, I think this is Australian here, this talk, but I know people talk like that, but it's so consistent here that I think that's, and I was listening to some other Australians talk too. So here, this invalidates the prayer, even if he had an excuse, such as the followers' slow recitation of the Fatiha. That's an excuse. Despite this excuse, that's an excuse when he can't recite faster, not because he intentionally recited slow. He can't recite faster. So, despite this excuse, this reciter can't recite fast. If the Imam does 3 long integrals, that's bowing and 2 prostrations, then let's see what the Shaykh says. Hence, if the follower stays behind to finish reciting Al-Fatiha, after the Imam completes bowing and the 2 prostrations, and sits for the tashahhud or stands up for the following cycle. So what do you do after you prostrate twice? One of 2 things. Either you're going to sit for the tashahhud or you're going to stand up for the next rak'ah. Then the follower must leave out the remainder of his current cycle to be in unison with the Imam, and must perform 1 cycle after the closing salam of the Imam, because it was left out. If the follower does not follow the Imam, rather he continues with the remainder of the cycle, then his prayer is nullified. What this means is, the follower is reciting Al-Fatiha. The Imam bows. That's a long integral. Doesn't mean he has to stay there for a long time. It's just in itself is a long integral. And he stands up. And then the follower is still reciting Al-Fatiha. And then he goes down for sujood. That's a long integral. And then he sits up. And the follower is still reciting Al-Fatiha. Then the Imam makes a second sujood. That's a 3rd long integral. And the follower is still reciting Al-Fatiha. Then, if the Imam sits up to recite At-Tashahhud, the follower needs to stop what he's doing and sit down with the Imam. Or if the Imam stands up for the next rak'ah, then the follower needs to cancel that rak'ah he was in and just start the next rak'ah with the Imam. In either case, he interrupted his rak'ah. And if he does not interrupt this rak'ah to be with the Imam and he continues with his own pace, then his prayer is invalidated. If he continues with his own pace without the intention of breaking away from the Imam, he keeps the intention of following the Imam and keeps his own pace, though the Imam outpaced him by 3 long integrals, this will invalidate his prayer, the follower's prayer. However, if the follower completes his recitation of the Fatiha before this, yani before the Imam completes 3 long integrals, that means he finishes his Fatiha and he bows before the Imam lifts his head from the second sujood. So if the follower completes his recitation of Al-Fatiha before this and commences with the fourth before this, and then he continues in the order of his own prayer. Then he continues in the order of his own prayer until he catches up with the Imam. He means he or she. Okay. Any question here?
Yes, Shaykh, I got a question.
Yes.
You said once he lagged behind the Imam, but he makes his intention to do it on his own, then goes back. Once he catches up, he goes back, make another intention to go follow the Imam.
Well, if he breaks away from the Imam, no, he's not going to make the intention to follow the Imam after that. If he breaks away from the Imam, he's just praying on his own.
So once he finally catches up with the Imam, will he get the reward for the congregation?
If he never broke away from the Imam and he never invalidated his prayer, he's still in the congregation.
As long as he don't break away from it. Okay. All right, I got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. So let me repeat, make sure it's clear. What I'm saying is, here's a scenario. The Imam bows while the follower is still reciting Al-Fatiha. Then he stands up. Follower is still reciting Al-Fatiha. That's 1 long integral. Then he prostrates and sits up. That's 2nd long integral. Follower is still reciting. Then he prostrates and either he sits up or he stands up. And the follower is still reciting. Now here, the follower, he has some options. If he chooses to break away from the Imam altogether, then he detached himself. He's out of the congregational prayer, and now he just goes by his own pace. If he doesn't break away, if he chooses not to break away from the Imam, then it's necessary that he stops what he's doing and does whatever the Imam is doing. And now he's still in the congregation. He never broke away from the Imam. If he keeps his own pace and he doesn't stop what he's doing, he will invalidate his prayer. So, inshallah, that's clear. So, are you proceed in Fatiha? I'm sorry, your question is not clear for me. You said, at what point does he need to break away from the Imam in time that his prayer is not invalid? Is it before the Imam lifts his head from the second sujood? Well, so the meaning of your question to me is, what's the exact second? What's the exact second that he needs to do it or else his prayer is invalidated? Is that your question? How many seconds does he have? Exactly. I think that's your question. So don't go this way. Here, keep it simple, which is like what I told you. He's gonna, if he wants to not invalidate his prayer, he has to stop what he's doing. If the Imam stands up, he stops his recitation. If the Imam sits down, he stops his recitation and he joins the Imam. Uh, but if you're looking for the exact second, don't look for the exact second there. If there is one, I don't know it. He said, can you precede the Imam in Al-Fatiha? This will not invalidate your prayer. I'll remind you of very good advice to understand rules, which is a lot of times in fiqh, which is religious rules, there's some gray area, something that's not like the exact second is not defined for you. The exact minute is not defined for you. The exact, very exact area is not defined for you. So what you do what's clear. Stay safe. If you can understand that, then you'll understand. If you can't understand that, then you're not going to understand a lot of things. He said, can you precede the Imam in Fatiha? Is it disliked? I don't know. Can you advise about simultaneity in reciting Al-Fatiha with the Imam? It's not Sunnah. It's not Sunnah. So, okay, understood. I think, but if he is a slow reciter, then does he go to ruku'? He needs to make ruku' before the Imam lifts his head from the second sujood in order to be able to keep his own pace. So if he's slow reciter and his Imam's going ahead of him and he learned and he says, okay, I got to get this done. Let me try to go faster. And the Imam went down the sujood and he's trying. And the Imam sat up. He's trying to finish. And then the Imam went down the sujood and he finally said, Wala Balleen. Then he bends over. Then he caught it. Then the Imam lifts his head from sujood. And then this one follows his own sequence. He keeps his own sequence now and catches up with the Imam. He still follows the Imam. Yeah, he keeps his own sequence now. And he catches up with the Imam. Yes. Amin wa fikum. The second matter is that the follower must know the movements of his Imam by either seeing the Imam, seeing some of the followers who see the Imam, hearing the Imam's voice, or the voice of the conveyor. So there. This is a condition for following the Imam. What was the question that came a couple minutes ago? Question was, what if I'm not sure if the Shaykh is in ruku' or he started to rise? So why are you not sure? What makes you unsure? You can't see him and you can't hear him and you can't see anyone who follows him and you can't hear any of them and nothing? What makes you unsure? Then you're unable to follow the Imam. It is a condition to follow the Imam that you know his moves. How are you going to know his moves? Either by seeing him or seeing those who follow him. And remember, the lines in front of you are like the Imam for you. The lines in front of you are like the Imam for you. So either you can see the Imam or you can see the lines in front of you. Or you can hear him or them or even someone else who's conveying the moves of the Imam. Like when the Imam says, Allahu Akbar, then there's someone who says, Allahu Akbar. Even if this one is standing on the side, not in the prayer. Even if this one is a woman or someone else conveying the moves of the Imam. But it's not sunnah to be a conveyor if the Imam is audible. When the Imam is audible, then you don't need to convey his moves. But sometimes you might have big Jama. You don't have microphone, for example. So then no problem. Or sometimes the Imam is so soft-spoken. You might have prayed behind an Imam's like you're in the front line and you can barely hear him. How about the people in the back? So then you'll convey his moves. You said, because everyone is in ruku' and my vision is on the ground. Okay, but you can't hear them come up? You can't hear them come up. You can't even hear the ruffling of their clothes. Nothing. So, but the Imam rises first before he says anything. So he may have already started rising, which I can't know. Sometimes you might not know if the Imam moved. So then when you know he moved, then you move. What if the Imam stood up and you're still in ruku'? You don't know he stood up. So you're not going to stand up. You wouldn't stand up if you don't know he stood up. And then he goes down to sujood. So unless you're telling me your scenario is, if the Imam stood up, I made ruku'. I can't see anything but the ground. I'm not going to lift my head up. Even in ruku', I'm not going to lift my head up to look, because that's not going to break your ruku'. I'm just going to stay looking at the ground. I can't hear anything. So maybe a person would be in a situation where he can't hear, he can't see. You can't follow the Imam like that. You can't follow the Imam without knowing his moves. Like, what's an example of not knowing his moves? It's pitch black and you didn't join the prayer yet, and all you hear is Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. So you don't know what he's doing. So you can't follow him without knowing what he's doing. Do you want to follow up with your question, brother? Like, even in this case, you said my vision's on the ground. Can't you just lift your head and look and see what's going on without breaking your ruku'? He said, what if I'm catching the prayer? Do I make that cycle up again or not? It's not clear for me what you're asking. The third matter is that the follower must be with his Imam in a mosque, even if the distance between the two exceeds 300 cubits. Meaning, within a mosque, then the distance between the Imam and the follower is irrelevant as far as validity is concerned. Not as far as dislikeness, but as far as validity. Or else, meaning if they're not in a mosque, if the follower and the Imam were not praying in a mosque, yeah, so that's repetition. That's the meaning of or else. Or else, that means if they're not in a mosque together. So then he said, if they're not in the mosque together, then the follower must be within approximately 300 cubits of the Imam. However, if there were successive rows of followers, it is a condition that the distance between the follower and the next row not exceed 300 cubits if they're outside of the masjid, because the line in front of you is like your Imam. Even if the distance between the follower and the Imam was several farsakhs, like what if there's miles between you and the Imam, but you're connected to the Imam by roads? It's valid. But you need to be within 300 cubits of the last line if you're outside of the masjid. You say, so I was not in the prayer. I come in while the Imam is in ruku'. Okay. But the time I enter ruku', he may have started rising already. So if you're not in ruku' with the Imam for sure, then you need to do another rak'ah. It's a condition when joining late in ruku' that you're in ruku' with the Imam, with tuma'nina for sure. So if you're not sure, then you need to do another rak'ah. Amin wa fiq. The fourth matter is that there must not be any barrier between the follower and the Imam that prevents him from reaching the Imam, such as a wall or a closed door. Here, non-pushable. I didn't learn this detail here. Nor a barrier which prevents the follower from seeing the Imam, such as a closed, pushable door. So pushable and unpushable, I never learned that detail before. The said fourth integral must be observed if prayed outside of the masjid. This one. So, if you are blocked from the imam, you can't reach the imam. There's a barrier between you and the imam, like a wall. Yani, like, for example, even let me be more clear. Like you're in a room and the imam's in a different room and the door is closed. You can't follow the imam this way in the Shafi'i school. Or you're on one floor and the imam's on the other floor and there's a TV screen. You cannot follow the imam like this in the Shafi'i school without being connected by lines. Without being connected by lines. If you're connected by lines, then it's valid. Like, what if the building has the way the walls, the way the rooms in the building are is, let's say, like a maze in a way. There's an imam, and behind him there's a line. And behind that line there's another line, and this line goes into one of the rooms. And then within that room there's people behind some of that line. Then that's valid. Even if those people wouldn't be able to make it to the imam on their own in that spot. And then let's say it goes on, and then there's another corridor. As long as it's connected by lines, it's valid. Because remember, the line in front of you is like your imam. Is like the imam. Is the imam for you. Fire is not a barrier. A stream is not a barrier. Darkness is not a barrier. The fifth matter is that the prayer format of both the follower and that of the imam must agree in their outward movements. Yani the format, the form of the prayer. Even if they differ in their intention and number of cycles. Hence, in the Shafi'i school, take out that in the Shafi'i school. I just got ahead of myself here. Hence, it is invalid for the performer of the daily obligatory prayer, such as the obligatory dhuhr, to follow the performer of the funeral prayer. That's invalid, yes, because the two prayers differ in format. But it is valid for this one who's praying dhuhr to follow someone who's praying fajr or asr, because they have the same form. The sixth matter is that both the imam and the follower must not disagree enormously with each other in a recommended act, whether by doing it or leaving it out. So here they said enormously. It might be translated atrociously. To disagree atrociously because of the significance of that recommended act, which he has an example for you. Whether by doing it or leaving it out, like sitting for the first tashahhud. So the imam is sitting and the follower is standing, or the imam is standing, the follower is sitting. This difference is an atrocious one. As opposed to if the imam is lifting his hands to say Allahu Akbar and the follower is not lifting his hands to say Allahu Akbar, this is not an atrocious difference. So, if the imam omits it and the follower does it, then the follower's prayer is invalidated. The same applies to the sujood performed for forgetting some parts of the prayer. I.e., if either the imam or the follower does it and the other leaves it out, then the follower's prayer is invalidated. If the imam does sujudu sahu and you don't, your prayer is invalidated. If the imam does not do sujudu sahu and you do, your prayer is invalidated. Does the qunut apply to this? Let me review. However, disagreeing with one's imam in a recommended act which does not constitute an enormous disagreement or an atrocious disagreement. Fahish, the word's fahish in Arabic. such as Jilsatul Istiraha, that means sitting, the brief sitting of relaxation, if you want to translate it literally. That's sitting you do after you prostrate and before you stand up. You come up from sujood. You might come up from sujood immediately into the standing position, but a sunnah to actually, instead of standing immediately from sujood, to come out of sujood into a brief sitting and then to stand up. That brief sitting, that's called jilsatul istiraha. This does not invalidate the follower's prayer. The seventh matter is that the follower must intend to follow the imam, or he must intend to pray in congregation. Those are equivalent intentions. While saying the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, in the Jumu'ah prayer, because Jumu'ah is exclusively a Jama'ah prayer, so the intention to follow the imam or to pray in congregation must be in the takbir. And in the repeated prayer, because the repeated prayer, repeated obligatory prayer, is exclusively a congregational prayer. But what's meant here by repeated prayer is when you validly prayed an obligatory prayer that doesn't have to be repeated. We're not talking about a case when you have to repeat your prayer, like one of the tayammum cases, when you're going to pray on time and then still make it up later. Or some cases of having a cast, you're going to pray now and still make it up later. Or like when you didn't have any water or soil and you prayed and you're still going to make it up later. Or repeat it if you want. Repeat it. We're not talking about that. We're talking about you prayed a prayer and it's valid and you don't have to repeat it, but you repeated it so that someone else can get the reward of congregation, or so that you can get the reward of congregation. Then this must be in congregation. Therefore, since it must be in congregation, in other words, you're not going to repeat it for no reason, just because you want to, it's not permissible. Like you don't pray two Dhuhr prayers because you just want to. If you want to pray more, you pray Sunnah. You don't repeat Dhuhr. So since this repeated prayer is exclusively a Jama'ah prayer, you must have the intention to follow the Imam in the Takbir. And the prayer that's combined because of rain, that's exclusively a Jama'ah prayer. And the prayer that was vowed or pledged to be performed in congregation. And other prayers that are not exclusively Jama'ah prayers, like any of the five prayers, you might pray them in Jama'ah or you might pray them alone. If you say Allahu Akbar without an intention to pray in Jama'ah, your prayer does initiate, because it's not a condition to be in Jama'ah, then it is allowed, this attention is allowed to occur after the opening Allahu Akbar. Although it must occur before following the Imam in his moves, after a long wait for the Imam to move. Hence, if the follower proceeded in praying behind an Imam, he went on to pray behind an Imam after waiting his movements at length, while neglecting the intention to follow him, then the follower's prayer is nullified. However, if the follower awaits the Imam but does not follow him, and he follows him coincidentally without the intent to follow him, or he follows the Imam intentionally without the lapse of a long wait, then the follower's prayer is not invalidated. I need to review this part. There's something here that's not clear for me. And let me squeeze in this last paragraph here, and then we will have completed the chapter. It is an obligation upon the Imam to have the intention that he is leading the prayer and all the prayers which are required to be prayed in congregation, such as the Jumu'ah prayer and the repeated prayer, while saying the opening Allahu Akbar. So that should be clear for you. A prayer that is exclusively a congregational prayer, the Imam must make the intention to be the Imam while saying the takbir. However, this is recommended in other prayers. For the Imam to intend to be the Imam is just recommended in other prayers. Other than the Friday prayer, other than the repeated prayer, it's recommended only because his prayer still initiates. The repeated prayer is the prayer which one prays again in congregation after having prayed it alone or in congregation, like we said. Wallahu a'lam. If you have any question there, feel free. Said low voice. All right. Is it clear though? Did you hear? Because we just finished now. So if it was clear, then I'll suffice with that. Yes. However, this is recommended in other prayers, meaning prayers that are not exclusively congregational prayers. It's recommended for the one who's being followed to make the intention to be the Imam. In other words, it's possible to be followed without intending to be the Imam. That's valid. For the follower, it's valid. And for the one who's the Imam, his prayer is valid, but his prayer is independent of that one. That one's prayer is dependent on the one he's following, and the one who's being followed, his prayer is not dependent on the one who's following him. If someone is following you, then it's recommended for you to make the intention to be the Imam. If it's a prayer that's exclusively prayed in congregation, then it's a condition to make the intention to be the Imam while you say Allahu Akbar. The repeated prayer is the prayer which one prays again in congregation after having prayed it alone, or in congregation. And women can pray in congregation with a woman. No problem here. That's Shafi'i school. And it's recommended if a woman is leading women in prayer, it's recommended for her to be in the middle of the line. And it's okay if she steps forward a little bit. That means she doesn't have to step forward. She can just be in the line with them and make the intention to be the Imam, and then she'd be in the middle of the line. And it's okay if she steps forward a little bit. Wallahu a'lam. Do you have any question I can answer for you?
Yes, I have a question. What was asked to me, and I'm asking you this, that if the Imam broke his prayer, who takes his spot? Or is everybody's invalid?
Let me review that for you, inshallah.
Sure.
So I can give you a strong, confident answer, inshallah. Any other question? Doesn't matter who leads the prayer in a repeated prayer. Not in the Shafi'i school. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.